Our next presentation will be by Jack Martin and Margaret Mauldin on recovering Alabama's native literature. Do we have a handout? And there is a handout which I will now hand the mic to Catherine and go distribute.
As you know, most of Alabama is creek country, but because of removal, most creeks were removed to Indian territory, so they live in Oklahoma now. It's nice to be following Walt and Drew and Ryan because many of the points that they brought up are points that we had to deal with in our own work on the Creek language. And we wanted to come today to talk about two projects that we've been working on. One is a collection of stories written down by a native Creek speaker named Ernest Gouge in 1915. He was born around 1865. And John Swanton, the ethnographer, visited Oklahoma in 1915 and hired Gouge to write these stories down. And then he took them to Washington, and this is something of a cliche. You know, when I go to places like the Seminole Tribe of Florida, one of the first things I'm asked is, are you going to take this to Washington and leave it there? So it's this continual story that we have. Anyway, I first became aware of these stories in 1996. I was in Virginia, and I was surprised to find a large stack of writings in Creek, and I made copies of them, and I sent them to Margaret Mauldin here in Oklahoma. And I said, what do you think of these stories? You know, what do you think of the Creek? And she, you know, we talked on the phone a lot, and she called back, and she was really excited about them. She said, these are the full versions of these stories. These are, you know, these are really valuable. We really need to work on these. So beginning in around 1996, we started working on these and tried to decide what we should do with them. If you have a handout now, the originals look like this on page 2. They're written in longhand. They're completely in Creek. At the top it says the three brothers and it says Creek on it, but John Swanton was the one who wrote that. The originals don't have any titles at all. They're all written that way. And this is using the traditional Creek spelling, or a version of it, that became popular in the 1800s. And they're completely untranslated, and they were just sitting there. So in dealing with these manuscripts, we had to face a number of issues. We had to consider the audience. As an academic and as a linguist, of course, I tend to fear reviews in journals, you know, and you start to worry about your transcription and your handling of the sources and all the footnotes and everything. But then I also have to remember the differences in population, that there are about 67,000 people, if you count the Creek Nation and the Seminole Nation, for whom these stories would be of interest. And if you start to count the number of linguists who would be interested in these stories, you know, it's probably one hand. So just the numbers tended to skew it a little bit in how we would present these things. What we eventually decided to do with these was to go for multiple formats. So we decided to take the stories and put some of it on the web. The academics got the web, okay? And we decided to create a book for the Creek-speaking population, or the Creek population, and that would have side-by-side Creek and English. And then we also wanted to preserve the sound, so we were fortunate in that Margaret's daughter had a recording studio. And so Margaret, I guess over the course of a month or so, we would go every week to the recording studio, and Margaret would read these stories in Creek, and we would record them, and we decided to take those and make a DVD. So it's complicated, but for this first project, we decided to have 3 separate products that would try to address these different audiences. And so the web has all the footnotes and such, and the book has side-by-side, which is more accessible, and the DVD has a record of the sound. And if you look then, the original here is on page 2, and then on page 3, this is the sort of technical information that you might get that has the In the first line, it has the traditional Greek spelling. In the second line, it has a phonemic spelling, broken up into morphemes with morpheme by morpheme gloss. And then we have a free translation done by Margaret and her sister. The second project that we're working on currently is a large collection of stories reported by Mary Haas in the 1930s and 40s. She lived near Eufaula, Oklahoma, for quite a while and worked with a number of speakers, especially with a man named Jim Hill. And she seems to have spent a lot of her time dictating. She'd go every day and probably sit outside under a tree, and he would tell stories or descriptions of ceremonies and such and write them down, and she would write it out phonemically like any linguist would. And what we have now is these phonemic and sometimes phonetic transcriptions, and the same questions arise. So we're trying to figure out now what to do with those. It's really a huge amount of text. We've just finished typing all these, and we have them in interlinear format now, and it's about 700 pages. We expect it'll be about 1,000 pages when we get it edited. So it's been fun to work on. I wanted to show you just a little bit more about what we're doing with these things. We have this part of this DVD on the screen here. If you could press, say the fourth story, see if that works.
Istihapovet faran ahoyadis. Mond vilagit ihavo mahida ilhayat tapagaris. Momen momi fire livola ogiba. Istinjavo iagit lechiskos magit hufonov fullet omadis. Mondoman mahangata pohyagibiont alibet omen. Kos momit aledado horomis magirok hoyans mongat iagit leget omas gajan tapagaris. Mond yumotsken momin gajan tapkagen ohayatken man nagi momit oman ohoyadido. Hoktagida ohaydagi allahogibans magadis mahogans.
That's enough, actually.
Mond hombedanagi momin hitskali onward.
Thank you. We have the original here, so there's really no reason. But I wanted to at least give you a description of how we're approaching these different texts. And since we have a fluent Greek speaker here, we also wanted to try to get some idea of the community view of these sorts of things. So.
Okay. I like to have a lot of fun. So I think we can do that if you'll look at your handout, the story problem. This is a short story, a very short story, and I think you can get a lot of enjoyment out of it. And what I'm going to do is to read the English paragraph, and then I suggest those of you who can't read Greek maybe to close your eyes and just listen to the story in Greek, whether it is paragraph by paragraph, and let's see how many of you really think it sounded like a story, the way it sounds in English. Okay. A young woman gave birth to a child whose father was unknown. So she lived alone with the child and was asked about that. Tell who the father is, they'd say, but she wouldn't tell. Hokti manitianget kobulwa ojadis ikti bachigon. Mondo mare, is legidon in bohet, istet ishkidonomat onayas, gego jidos stonas, onayagodados boys. Now the woman had relatives, and they had an idea, and they said, she can't do well living like that. Whoever the father of the child is should marry her. Let's look for his father, they said, and held a meeting. And they